This is my tea bottle, not to be confused with a pee bottle. Found a pair of trekking poles. Actually, they're two orphans. They don't match or anything, but I found them in a hiker box, and a hiker box is where backpackers will leave equipment or food that they don't need, and they'll pick up food or equipment that they do need. And so I checked the hiker box and I found these. One of them needs a little repair, but I can do that. I did a face plant yesterday. I turned my ankle on the edge of the trail and went face first. And so I decided that having the trekking poles was going to help me out. In this episode, I'm going to tell two stories. One with which you'll be pretty familiar, most of you. It comes from the Bible. And the other has a similar theme, and it comes from my life experience. So I hope you enjoy them. Once there was a man who had two sons. And one day the younger of the two came to him and said, "Father, give me my share of inheritance now." And so his father divided his inheritance between them. And then, not many days later, the younger son gathered all of his possessions and traveled to a far country. And there, he squandered everything on reckless living. And after he had spent everything, there came a famine on that land, and he began to be in want. So he hired himself out to a citizen of that country, and the citizen sent him out into the field to feed pigs. And he was so hungry that he longed to eat even the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. One day, the young man came to himself and said, "How many of my father's servants have more than enough to eat? And here I starve. I know. I'll go to my father and I'll say, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Please take me in as one of your hired servants.'" And so he left for his father's place. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him, and he felt compassion. And he ran to him, and he embraced him, and he kissed him, and he told his servants, "Go, bring the best robe and put it on him. put shoes on his feet and a ring on his hand, and then go and kill the fattened calf so that we might celebrate. My son was dead, and now he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found. And so they all went and began to celebrate. A little while later, the older son was coming in from the fields, and he heard the music and the dancing. And he called to one of his servants and asked what was the meaning of this. And his servant told him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him home, safe and sound." And so the older brother refused to go in, and his father came out to entreat with him. And he told his father, "Look, all these years I've served you, and not even once have you given me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. And here this son of yours comes home after spending your money on prostitutes, and you slaughter the fatted calf for him." And his father looked at him and said, "Son, my son, you have been with me always, and all that I have is yours. But it's right that we celebrate, for your brother, he was dead, and now he's alive again. He was lost. He was so lost. And now he's found." I was in 5th grade, and my brother was in 6th, and my mother was a grade school teacher, so we all got home at about the same time. My father, he was a calculus professor, and he had office hours in the late afternoon, so he would get home between 5 and 6 usually, and then we would have dinner, and we would talk about the day's events. One day, it was very stormy out, and my brother and mother and I had gotten home, and we were watching TV in a little room called the study. And it began to hail, and the hailstones were pretty impressive, so we went out to the garage, and when a hailstone would bounce into the garage from the driveway, we would pick it up and put it in a dish, and then we'd put him in the freezer so we could show my father when he got home. Then we went back inside the house and went back in the study to watch TV, and the window started rattling, and my mom looked outside and saw that the young trees that she'd just planted last year were kind of bowing over in the wind, almost double. And the window was rattling, and she thought, we probably ought to get someplace safe. And so she said, let's leave this room and go into the inner closet under the stairs. And she was kind of pushing my brother along, and I was following. And just as they were getting in the closet, and I was still following, that's when it hit. And as I was knocked prone to the floor, I started to feel the house shake and rattle. I could feel the wind blowing everything across my back. I don't know what was going on. In the kitchen, just feet from where I lay, the cabinets were just vomiting out all of the dishes and the glassware onto the floor. Some kind of a violent rage. I heard the breaking of glass, I heard the cracking of wood, and then I felt the house move. The front of the storm had caught the house and torn it from its foundations, and it wasn't really flying through the air because I could feel under my belly, I could feel the subfloor just scraping across the ground. And as it moved, I just prayed the only prayer that a child knows. God save me. God save me. God save me. Then the house started moving in a different direction as the back of the funnel took control. And I just knew I was going to die. And then, all of a sudden, it just stopped. Now the sound, the crashing and breaking and cracking and the locomotive thunder of the wind, that really hadn't stopped, but the house stopped. We were later to learn that there was a fence row about 75 feet from our foundation. And on that fence row there were very mature trees, big oaks and maples. And those trees were like the hand of God that just reached up and caught our house like it was some kind of baseball glove. And though the wind wanted us, the trees refused to give. So our house stayed there. Then it was quiet. The rain was still falling, but the storm was gone. It was moving another 4 miles off across the Illinois countryside into Indiana. And in that relative quiet, I got up, and I didn't remember that my mother and brother had gone into the closet. I didn't know where they were, so I yelled, "Mom!" And she answered, "We're in here." So I ran to the living room, which was on the other side of the closet. It's where I thought I heard the voice come from. And the house had been a big colonial 2-story with 2 wings. One of the wings was the garage, one of the wings was the living room. What was amazing is I got to the living room and it wasn't there. It was just a great big hole in the side of the house. And so I was confused, and I turned and I yelled, "Where are you?" And she yelled, "We're in the closet," as I ran back to the closet door. When I opened the closet, I saw my mom with blood just streaming out of her mouth. And my brother, he was on the floor, kind of moaning and groaning and holding his head, which wasn't entirely unusual for him. But again, seeing the blood coming from my mom's mouth really unnerved me. And she was partially trapped by the subfloor. There had been a scuttle hole in the closet where, from where you could access the crawl space. And her foot had gotten caught there in that scuttle hole opening. And in hindsight, what was evident is that had the house moved even 3 or 4 more feet, it probably would have torn her leg off. But as it was, she was okay. And so she kind of wrestled her foot from under the subfloor and got up and got my brother up, and she grabbed us together, gave us a little hug, and we went out the hole that used to be the living room and went out into the rain in the yard. As we came out of the house, we found our neighbor lady rushing across the yard to see if we were still alive. And our neighbor gathered us together and took us to her house and got a couple of rags and put ice in them and gave one to my brother to put on his head, gave one to my mom for her lip. After that, she got us into her car so that she could take us to the hospital. And as we were pulling out of the driveway, the volunteer fire department was coming onto the scene. And it's a small community and everybody knows everybody. And so she explained to the firemen my mother and my brother's injuries and how she was taking us to the hospital, and to tell my father when he came home that that's where we were. And so we sped off. Now my father had heard the news, and he had heard that the tornado had hit our town, and so he rushed home from school, and as he came near the house, he was stopped by the fire department, and he asked, "Have you heard about my family?" And the fireman, he said, "Oh yeah, the neighbor lady, she took your wife and your older son to the hospital because your wife had a split lip and your older son had a bump on his head. And they went there to get him checked out." And then my father asked, "Well, what about Chris? What about my younger boy?" And the fireman said, I don't recall seeing him." My father looked up at the chaotic mess and destruction that had been pretty much everything he'd worked for to that point in his life. And couldn't care less. He whipped that car around without giving it a second glance, and he sped off in the direction of that hospital. Now, when we had gotten to the hospital, they took my mother up and put 4 stitches in her lip, cleaned her up some, and took my brother in, and they said they were gonna put him in some kind of an overnight observation. And you know, I'm not sure it's because of the bump on his head, or maybe they'd just never seen anything as weird as he was, but he was gonna spend the night there in the hospital. And as for me, they took off my shirt and they kind of sponged off my back, all the little scrapes and scratches. And I don't know what blew across my back, but I do know that we pulled some shrubbery from out between my belt and my pants. But after they got me all cleaned up, they put me in a little hospital gown and they set me down in the waiting room for my mom to come down. And that's where I sat watching the TV. When my father got to the hospital, he pulled in, he parked in a no parking zone. He didn't care. He ran into that emergency room. The first thing he saw sitting across that waiting room was his little boy just looking up at the TV. He ran up to me. He embraced me. And he kissed me. And he told me what a wonderful thing it was to see me. You see, I could have been dead, but I was alive again. I'd been lost, but now I was found. I drink a lot of things mixed into water. Water kind of bores me these days, so I drink a lot of juice mixes and tea. I like iced tea or lukewarm tea, whatever it becomes here. A lot of my friends and family try to get me to drink more just plain water. I'm not sure why. But I've heard the statistics on water. Did you know that 100% of people who drink water eventually die? Man, if there's an argument for why people need Jesus, that statistic is true. Anyway, I like to mix things with my water, and this is my tea bottle. A young hiker early in the trail, he asked if it was my pee bottle. A pee bottle is a jar that generally older hikers will take into their tent at night, and that way they don't have to get up in the middle of the night and go outside. And usually it's a wide mouth jar, like a peanut butter jar or something like that. But I told the young hiker, I can't imagine anybody ever carrying a half full pee bottle on the trail. So never get the two confused, and never carry a half full pee bottle on the trail. It's not very useful.